This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and what's rose gold on the outside and white on the inside? It's not the latest Oreo cookie for springtime. This is the Dell XPS 13 2018 edition, or 9370 for the model number. And as if the XPS 13, one of the smallest 13-inch Ultrabooks on the planet, wasn't small enough and light enough for you, well, they made it even thinner, not so much smaller in other dimensions, and even lighter. There's a lot of other interesting changes and inside. And this one is on sale, and so is the 2017 edition, so you'll have a choice between the two of them. We're going to look at it now. So for the XPS 13, this is the first redesign since the new look that we saw about 3 years ago, which is this one right here. And you know, the first thing I'll tell you is that this doesn't look that much different. Really, it's the design heritage is pretty clearly there. The biggest changes that they've made are making it thinner, as if the old one was thick. It certainly wasn't. At 15 millimeters, this is down to 11.6 millimeters. And they've shaved the weight off of the touchscreen model, which is the 4K model. We'll talk about the displays in detail later. So now, whether you get the touch or the non-touch screen, you're talking 2.68 pounds, which is 1.21 kilograms, so it got a bit lighter. So what happened there? Well, they reduced the battery capacity. That's one of the cons right there, is that it went from 60 watt hour on the pre-existing model to 52 watt hours. So that's a significant amount of battery they reduced. Happily, the XPS 13 line is one of the longest running laptops that you can get. So you're still working with a lot of potential there for battery life. Also, the thinnification, one of the reasons the old XPS 13 was the thickness that it was, because they said that's as thin as they could go and still retain so-called legacy ports, otherwise known as the useful ports that we all still use, like USB-A, for example. Now, the XPS 13 9360, the previous model, really didn't have a whole lot of other ports besides USB-A and those Thunderbolt 3 ports anyway. So here you have only Thunderbolt 3/USB-C ports, and it charges over one of those ports as well, so one of them will be taken up by the charger, unless you get something like the Dell Thunderbolt dock, one of those solutions that can do charging and multiple port replicating and all that sort of thing. You do have a headphone jack on here, though, yay! And the SD card slot is now a micro SD card slot. So that's great for those of you who just want to get footage off of your phones, videos, photos that you take using your phone and a micro SD card. But for those of you who are, say, pro photo and video type folks who are using full-size SD cards, you know that it's harder to find micro SD cards that are really fast enough for 4K video editing, and also they cost more too. So there's a trade-off there for this thinnification, this lightification. It's, you know, it's the 12-inch MacBook phenomenon hitting Windows. Again, the HP Spectre 13, not the X360, just the regular HP Spectre 13 that we reviewed, which comes in a stunning white finish. That one, too, just goes with Thunderbolt 3 ports. So it's not unusual for these super thin and light ones. And that's one of the reasons why Dell is keeping the late 2017 XPS 13, the 9360, around, because some of you might want more ports. You might want that bigger battery, all that sort of thing. So as a nod to dongle life or dongle hell, at least they include this in the box. This is a USB-C to USB-A adapter. So when you want your flash drive, your external hard drive, your mouse to work out of the box, well, at least there's this until you lose it. Now, the smallification goes on even for the charger. Yes, there's a white matching charger if you get the white model of the XPS 13 9370. So you can see, compared to the previous generation charger, there's actually a difference in size. They're both 45 watt. They do the same thing, same styling and all that overall, but that's true. Speaking of white and, well, that rose gold, for those of you fellas, part of Western culture, who just say, I don't do no pink, thank you very much, and white, you can still get it in that kind of signature dark gray metal finish with the black carbon fiber interior. Now, the white one is kind of neat, and for those of you who have used some of the XPS models, you know how the carbon fiber might feel really great, but boy, does it pick up fingerprint oils. Ugh. And it's a chore to clean it. And the trackpad, too, the coating on the trackpad is the same way. Well, the white one is a woven glass fiber. They don't call it fiberglass. It's glass fiber. It's some other kind of compound. It's not just fiberglass. And they have a UV coating on top. In fact, it's a coating that they say resists stains, and some Dell representatives were going around at CES using Sharpie markers on them and then wiping it off to show that it really was effective. So if you're worried about the white turning, it should be cleanable. And the same thing is true for the white HP Spectre 13. Anyway, the texture is kind of neat on it. I wouldn't say it feels as great as the carbon fiber does, but boy, you just don't see any, you know, fingerprint oils or anything like that. Same thing goes for the trackpad as well. Now the keyboard on it, here's the thing that you would think about and worry about, and it's true. You've got white backlighting on a white keyboard. Well, rocket science, that's just not going to work out well. It was bad enough with the HP Spectre X360 silver models when you had light silver with a white backlighting. So yeah, it has a sort of bluish tinge to the white backlighting, but still in middling light, it makes it really hard to see the keys. So I typically turn it off unless I'm in a really dark place, and then it does get the job done. Other than that, the keyboard does feel slightly improved. I've never been in love with the XPS 13 keyboards. I mean, because they're very short travel, 1.3 millimeter Dell claims now. They used to say 1.2 millimeter, but now for both the 9360 and the 9370, they're saying it's 1.3 millimeter. Anyway, the travel is very low, and when you hit bottom, it feels a little bit abrupt, but it's never stopped me from typing very well. It just doesn't feel super comfortable, sort of like, you know, you're wearing on your joints and your fingers or something like that. It's a perfectly competent keyboard other than that, and fairly quiet. Speaking of keyboards, some of you have noticed coil whine emanating from the keyboard area, which is where the motherboard is on your XPS 13s previously. This is a redesigned motherboard here. However, coil whine is not unique to Dell laptops. Surface Books 2s have them, HP Spectre X360s have them. It's just a fact of life when you have voltage oscillating inside the machine. I do not hear any. I put my ear to the keyboard when it's plugged in and charging, because that's usually when you'll hear it. You'll hear some of the charging circuitry actually vibrating inside as it charges. I'm not hearing it. There is a little bit on this 9360 2017 model that we have here. So. All right, so in terms of core specs and pricing, it's $200 more than the XPS 139360, which, like I said, they're gonna continue selling that because it's different enough in several ways that they figure some of you might want one versus the other. So it starts at $999, which back in the day was the original starting price of the XPS 13 previous edition models, but now they've dropped to $799. So that's a pretty low-end configuration, though. That's 4 gigs of RAM, that's a Core i5, that's 128 gig non-PCIe NVMe SSD. You get the faster SSDs as you go up in storage configurations, 256 gig and above. So something that you probably want is going to be around $1,500. It's going to get you your 8 gigs of RAM. It's going to get you a larger SSD and a faster SSD, that sort of thing. You can go to town, and ours is one of the you can go to town models that Dell sent us, and that's the Core i7-8550U. That's Intel 8th Gen CPU, and we have a 512 gig PCIe NVMe SSD and a fast little bugger at that. It is. It's a Samsung PM961, which is fast. 16 gigs of DDR3 low power RAM. Yes, oddly, they're all about performance for this model and how it's even faster than the previous XPS 13, but they're still going with DDR3 low power instead of DDR4 RAM. They're still using killer Wi-Fi. That hasn't changed, so for those who hate killer Wi-Fi, sorry, I like it. It's good performance, all that sort of thing. A couple of other changes and improvements now. The fingerprint scanner was optional previously, so on this model, it's built into the power button, which is a pretty ingenious place because you're already there turning it on, and then you're ready to do your Windows Hello thing. And the camera, the chin cam, has moved at least to the center. It's still a chin cam down below, but it will now prominently feature both of your nostrils and your chin instead of just one on one side there. And it's a Windows Hello IR camera now too, so it can do facial recognition login, which is pretty cool. Yeah, I like that. It works quickly and it works fast. Yeah. So how about performance and thermals? Dell is bragging that this is the fastest little 13-inch Ultrabook on the planet, and is it? Well, it is one of the fastest. I mean, this guy right here has interesting cooling going on. We'll show the internals in a minute, but they're using Gore-Tex, that sports stuff, insulation stuff, to try to prevent it from feeling too hot to you, which has always been a challenge with the XPS 13s and any thin and light, powerful Ultrabook. A lot of heat in here, it's got to go somewhere. So they're keeping it inside, which sounds like an alarming thing to do, right? You're going to cook the internal components. Well, no, they redesigned the internals, so now you have 2 fans, which is a very unusual thing to see in an Ultrabook without dedicated graphics, and they've added another heat pipe. So you got 2 heat pipes there. So they do a pretty good job of venting out the heat. Now, in terms of the CPU temperatures, it still can get alarmingly hot. When we're running the graphics benchmarks on this, you hit 98 degrees centigrade for some of the CPU cores. 100 is the max that's allowed right there, so it's really pushing it. But it will push it as much as it can before it throttles back. We did see some of the cores eventually throttling, but it's interesting that Dell is so willing to let this run that hot internally. We're not talking about the surface temperatures here. The surface temperatures were remarkably mild in comparison. Never burning hot. Warm, yes. A little above human body temperature in the hot spots, but that's not so bad. Now, even the previous gen XPS 13, the 9360, the CPU cores would also get that hot. But we're seeing faster performance numbers here, and some of the fastest I have seen on the 13-inch Ultrabook. It's a quad-core, 15-watt nominally. It's an Ultrabook CPU. It's not one of those quad-core 45 watts that are used like an XPS 15 and gaming laptops and stuff. So you can only go so far with that. You know, this is not going to be your mobile workstation. It still has integrated Intel HD 620 graphics, but it's eking out that little bit of extra performance because they're doing something called TDP up. They're actually going over 15 watts for periods of time, and the cooling is there to allow them to do it. So think of it as something that usually you only see people do with gaming laptops, and that's some overclocking going on here as much as they can before they reach that thermal peak, and then they have to kind of calm it down so it doesn't shut down from overheating. A couple of other changes. The Infinity Edge display already was like, it started the whole low bezel size craze, right? Well, they made the bezels even smaller on the sides and on the top. The bottom, you still have to have room for the webcam and the IR Windows Hello camera there, so even smaller. And the Thunderbolt 3 on this is now 4 PCIe lanes, 40 gigabit per second. So for those of you who want to use something like an external GPU, an external graphics card box with this, you can. Now, I think that's a very small segment of the population that's doing that, only in part given the expense and the complexity of doing it. You got to buy a GPU box, you got to buy a GPU. These days with Bitcoin driving up the price of graphics card, goodness knows, you know. But for those of you who wish to do that sort of thing, you have the maximum throughput here for Thunderbolt 3, so that's an improvement over the older model. Speaking of the older model, if you feel like you need a comparison between the 2017 and the 2018 models because you're trying to decide between the two of them, shout out in the comments. If enough of you want that, I can make that happen. So you have two display options, which was true previously with the XPS 13 line, but they've changed a little bit. There's the full HD 1920 by 1080 display, and that one now is glossy. It's not matte. Will Dell add a matte option later? They might. I don't know. They've done things like that in the past. It's possible. Gorilla Glass 4 clad. And the other option is a 4K display. So it used to be QHD Plus, which is a little bit below 4K. So now we're talking true 4K, and it's a newer model of Sharp panel. I'm sure it's IGZO once again, but honest to goodness, you know, I think 4K is usually overkill for a 13-inch display because that's a pretty high pixel density at that point. But boy, it looks nice. It really does. It's just the quality of the panel. The colors are more natural. The white point is more in control compared to the previous ones. It's not so ultra white, blue white. It's closer to where it should be. It calibrates up pretty nicely. Certainly is sharp because you're talking about a lot of resolution there. And, you know, Dell had to do that because Lenovo's offering 4K displays with the Yoga 920. HP's doing it with the Spectre X360. So just to be competitive in the marketplace, they have to have that option available. But it's a pretty sweet one, and you can see on screen the metrics there. And it's quite good, and the color gamuts are getting better and better here. We're surpassing finally, even by a little bit, that little standard 75% of Adobe RGB and inching up a couple of points there. The brightness, by the way, madly bright, 415 nits. Now, before, Dell used to do all these things in BIOS to try to do heavy-duty power management to make sure you never really could get it to 415 nits, you know, unless it was really outdoor brightness enabled or something. Yeah, now you can. There are BIOS settings that let you control it, and it gets extremely bright. Speaking of 4K displays and all those sorts of things, it's going to be the same divide that we've always seen with the XPS 13, even the HP Spectre X360. Honestly, 13-inch model, when it comes to battery life, 4K is going to have the shorter battery life by several hours here. So that's just a fact of life, and whichever is more important to you may govern your decision. Though if you want a touchscreen, you do have to go with 4K right now. So there's that, and touchscreens are kind of nice things to have. So 52 watt-hour battery, not the 60 watt-hour battery in the 2017 model. So runtimes are not quite as good. They're still very good because the XPS 13 has been class leading in battery life, but with this 4K display, keeping it around 180 nits rather, of brightness, which pales in comparison to what it could do since it's so bright, but that's perfectly usable for indoor lighting situations. It ran about 7.5 to 8 hours with our 4K model, and that's a Core i7 model, so that's with a faster model with an ample 16 gigs of RAM and all that sort of thing. So it's going to be about as bad as battery life gets with this configuration here, being the most demanding. Now, if you go for the full HD display and maybe even a Core i5, though the CPU difference shouldn't be that great anyway, I would expect that you're still going to see probably 11 hours of battery life, maybe even 12, so falling short of the previous generation. Sound is an Ultrabook. You know, Dell makes a big deal about their Waves Max audio software and all that sort of thing. It has stereo laptop speakers on it. They are not that huge. It's pretty decent, though. It's adequate, is what I would call them. If you push them close to max volume, they will sound shrill, but I've heard worse. I've heard better, but not a lot better in 13-inch, because most 13-inch laptop speakers are just meh. It will fill a room with sound, and there is a bit of bass there, so it's not bad. And for the microphone pickups, this is becoming more and more important as we see Alexa integrated into laptops, and of course there's Cortana. The front end, you see those little dots that are there, those are for microphones to pick up your voice, far and near field. So to open this up, it's the usual Torx T5 screws here. Watch out for the clips on the back. They are plastic. I did manage to break one of those. So notice there's no service tag door. They finally did away with it here, the last gen model. There's the service tag door. We do have a square barcode right here, QR code, so maybe the information is held therein. I guess because this is so thin, they really didn't have room to keep that service tag door on there. So, like all Ultrabooks, the battery is most of what you see inside here. This is the stereo speaker system, and they are side firing out the side. And here we have our new dual fan design with 2 heat pipes rather than a single heat pipe. Again, unusual for something with integrated graphics, and it seems to be pretty effective too. And this is our M.2 PCIe NVMe SSD here, and it's got a little heat cover on it there as well. So where's the Wi-Fi card? Well, the Wi-Fi card is integrated into the motherboard. I unscrewed the screw that covers up this so you can see a little bit better. There are antenna leads. This is it right here. See, these are the 2 antenna leads for the Wi-Fi module that's surface mounted on the motherboard here. So those of you who are hoping to swap out the Wi-Fi card, not so much. So that's the redesigned Dell XPS 13 for 2018, the model 9370. And you know, at first I had my doubts, and I know some of you did too, when you reduce the battery capacity just to make it thinner, remove the so-called legacy ports, the useful ones, the USB-A ports. But then again, you know, the Dell XPS 13 didn't have a whole host of really useful ports on it before either. They had removed most everything except for the USB-A. It really grew on me very quickly. The redesign is subtle, but it does make it look more modern. The thinness kind of goes with the overall small footprint better. It's lighter if you get the touchscreen model. That I always appreciate. I mean, I don't think things need to get super crazy Mac-like thin, but less weight in the bag is always appreciated. And the new 4K display is really very nice looking. So they've done a good job here. It's nice to have choices. Again, if you want a smackdown between the 2017 model that Dell will continue to sell, the 9360, and this new 9370, just shout out in the comments and I can make it happen. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos, and thumbs up if you like this vid.